Across Ukraine, the bodies of hundreds of people who have been killed since Russia's invasion began are lying in overfilled morgues waiting to be identified. Our Eastern Europe correspondent Sarah Rainford had been to the town of Izum in eastern Ukraine. She's been speaking to police and forensic experts trying to identify victims of Russia's invasion. And we can go live to Kyiv now and talk to Sarah. Sarah, we should tell our viewers they are going to find some aspects of your report incredibly distressing, the interviews, the footage as well. You went to Izum. That must have been really hard, talking to people. What did you discover there?
Well, Lucy, I'd say the first thing that we discovered was just extraordinary destruction. Izum, of course, is a town that was under Russian occupation for many months, and the people there suffered Russian airstrikes. They were shelled for months on end, and large parts of that town have just been flattened. The destruction is terrible to see. But amongst those ruins, we found the families who still haven't found the bodies of people who were killed during that Russian occupation. Some of them killed months ago, even as early as March, some of the families we spoke to. So their agony is really ongoing. It hasn't stopped. We heard terrible stories of people, one woman who told us she was just looking for a fragment of her sister so that she could at least bury her. That's the thing. They feel like they're suspended in this horror because until they can have a funeral, until they can lay those bodies to rest, they can't begin to move on. And so it was really quite distressing to speak to those people. But these are people who wanted their stories to be told. So that's what we've done. But what we did find was extremely distressing. When this door is cracked open, the smell of death rushes out. Because those who lie in here were killed months ago. Each bag contains a victim of this war who's just a number for now. The dead of Izum, still waiting to be identified. And in their town, now liberated from Russian troops, the living are still waiting too. Families still searching for those killed when Izum was occupied. So the police are not only gathering evidence of atrocities here, they're taking DNA samples from people like Tatiana, who know their relatives are dead, but hope a DNA match can finally give them a body to bury. Tatiana's sister and nephew were killed in March in a Russian airstrike on their block of flats.
They found Zhenya, but Ira was torn apart. I cannot even find a piece of my sister. I'm waiting to find even a little piece, so I can bury them both together.
The police work going on here in this room is extremely calm and very careful because every single person who's coming in to see them has a terrible story to tell. All of them have close relatives who were killed when this town was occupied, and none of them have found their bodies yet. This is where Tatiana's sister and nephew died. They've been sheltering in the basement for safety. Even after months of this war, I found the scale of destruction staggering. Whole families were killed here. But identifying their remains is painfully slow. The experts are overwhelmed, and taking DNA from badly burned bodies is extremely difficult. But Tamara is desperate to find the body of her son. She led me into the wreckage of their home, destroyed just days before Izum was liberated. Oleg was killed here, lying in his bed. Tamara was taken to hospital, and in the chaos, no one's sure where her son was buried. I ask how she copes with that.
Every day I get up and think that my son is lying somewhere, and I just need to bury him properly. Forgive me, my dear son. I can't bear it.
It's possible Oleg was brought here, to one of hundreds of graves dug by volunteers when Izum was occupied. because many were buried with no name. This one says only old man. The bodies were exhumed in September, but so far just 5 have been identified through DNA tests. One of them was Vladimir Vakulinka. 9 months after his death, his family could finally hold a funeral. The children's writer had been abducted by Russian soldiers. But all this time, his mother had clung to hope. She now knows he was shot.
God teaches us to forgive, but I will never forgive the murderers. I will live on the hope and belief that the investigation finds who's responsible and that they will be punished.
Burying a loved one doesn't end a family's suffering. But it is a last goodbye that so many here are still being denied.
Oh, Sarah, the scale of the devastation there is so shocking, but also just the pain of those families. I mean, they obviously just need certainty so they can start some kind of grieving process. I mean, the pain just came through the screen that they were experiencing. And meanwhile, this war goes on, and we've been closely watching here in the newsroom what's been happening in Belarus today because President Putin is there. What are his objectives while he's in Minsk?
Well, that's a very good question, and I think it's one that Ukrainian officials are asking themselves very closely today, because this is the first time that Vladimir Putin himself has been to Belarus for some 3 years. We've seen the Belarusian leader, Alexander Lukashenko, fly to Russia, to various locations to meet Vladimir Putin multiple times in the past year or so, but not this direction, not Putin going to see Lukashenko. He's also accompanied by his defense minister and by Russia's foreign minister. So this is a very big delegation. The question is, what will they actually come out with? Is this all about the optics? Is it about showing that Russia is united with Belarus and perhaps planning to bring Belarus more deeply into this war in Ukraine? That's certainly what the people here, the officials here in Ukraine, are concerned about. There's been quite a lot of briefing from Kiev in recent days, concerned talk about a possible escalation of the ground war here in Ukraine, and concern that Vladimir Putin is putting pressure on the Belarusian leader to become far more involved in this war. And that's certainly something Ukraine itself is worried about, of course. And that means that the big thing to remember about this war, of course, we talk a lot about the battlefield, we talk about the front lines, we talk about the blackouts and the attacks on the power grid. But this is a war that every single day almost is killing civilians. And those are the civilians that we were meeting and talking to their relatives in the report that you just heard there. So, it's a war that has huge consequences for this entire country.
Sarah, thank you so much, and for that powerful reporting from Izum. Sarah Rainsford in Kyiv.